Please comment where you are listening from in the world. I like to think of myself as a pretty put-together person. I had a decent apartment in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, an espresso machine I actually used, and a curated record collection that practically begged for someone to ask, "Wow, you like vinyl?" I had also been single for way too long. So when I matched with Theo, a tall, soft-spoken guy with dimples and a suspiciously well-behaved golden retriever, I figured it was finally time to break the cycle of first dates that ended in ghosting, group texts, or gastrointestinal trauma. We matched on Sunday. By Wednesday, we were texting constantly. By Friday, we had plans to meet. He picked me up with a bouquet of sunflowers, which was a bold move considering we hadn't even exchanged last names yet. But honestly, I wasn't mad about it. He smelled like cedarwood and wore a flannel that looked like it had been ironed on purpose. I liked his energy, calm, thoughtful, a little dorky in the best way. We grabbed dinner at a cozy ramen spot downtown and walked through Cheeseman Park afterward, talking about everything from horror movies to our mutual hatred of group brunches. By the time we got back to my apartment, it felt natural to ask, "Want to come up for a bit?" He smiled. "I'd like that." What I didn't remember, what I truly should have remembered, was that earlier that morning I'd taken a shower. A very relaxing one. And in that shower was a particular item I typically stored away after use. An item that had, up until that day, never betrayed me. But on this fateful Friday, I'd been running late. I'd left in a hurry. And I'd forgotten one crucial detail. My companion, let's call it, was still stuck to the tile wall. Still suction cupped. Still blinking, thanks to a dying battery that refused to just give up and die with dignity. We got inside, kicked off our shoes, and I gave him the tour. "That's the kitchen. That's the living room. Bathroom's right there if you need it." He headed straight for the bathroom. I didn't think twice until I heard the door open. Then silence. Then an audible pause. And then, my blood ran cold. I sprinted mentally through every possible disaster scenario, but I already knew the truth. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood frozen in the hallway, just outside the bathroom, like a sim whose path had been blocked. Theo stepped out slowly. He looked conflicted. I looked at him. He looked at me. We both said nothing for a full 5 seconds, until he broke the silence. "So, is it motion activated?" I blinked. "What?" He gestured vaguely toward the bathroom. "It's blinking. Like rhythmically. Is that normal?" I wanted to evaporate. Die. Melt into the hardwood floorboards and seep into the pipes below. "It's not supposed to blink," I mumbled, voice barely audible. "The battery's dying. It's not on." He nodded slowly, lips pressed together, trying very hard not to laugh. I wasn't sure if I should salute it or unplug it. I let out a laugh, sharp, nervous, too loud. I usually put it away. I just forgot. "It's been a long week." He nodded again, now smiling. "No judgment. I mean, hey, it looks sufficient." I groaned and dropped my face into my hands. "Please stop talking about it." We stood there in awkward silence for another few seconds. Then he said, gently, "Do you want me to pretend I didn't see it?" I looked up at him, half laughing, half dying. "Yes, please. I would very much appreciate that." He gave me a mock salute. Acknowledged. I walked into the bathroom, grabbed the blinking pink embarrassment off the wall, and threw it into a drawer like it had personally betrayed me. I slammed the drawer shut, washed my hands out of sheer panic, and returned to the living room. Theo was sitting on the couch like nothing had happened, scrolling through his phone. I sat down beside him. "So," I asked, "are you traumatized?" He smiled. "Not at all. Honestly, I'm just relieved it wasn't a security camera or something." That made me laugh harder than I expected. We ended up talking for another hour, mostly about ridiculous dating stories. I told him about the guy who brought his mom to our second date. He told me about a woman who insisted on doing a full tarot reading before she'd let him kiss her. By the time he left, the mood was light again. He hugged me at the door and said, "Thanks for being cool, and for not pretending to be perfect." I texted him 10 minutes later. "Thanks for not running screaming from my bathroom." He replied, "Your toy and I have reached a peaceful coexistence. No hard feelings." We went on a second date, and a third. Eventually, the story of the forgotten toy became an inside joke, one we told close friends, always with a lot of side-eye and laughter. But I never forgot the lesson. Before any date, especially one that might end in a tour of your apartment, check the bathroom. Every time. Because dead batteries blink. and suction cups hold stronger than your dignity. You ever have one of those moments where the universe decides to humiliate you in 4K HD surround sound? Yeah, that was the night my moans hit the speakers before I could even hit pause. His name was Jasper. A little nerdy, a little artsy, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a mop of curls that looked like they'd never met a comb. We met on an app called Flickered, not the photo site, just similar branding for some reason, and messaged for about a week before he asked me out. He suggested drinks at a speakeasy off South Congress. I agreed because it looked Instagrammable and because he used punctuation in his texts. That's rare enough to be promising. We hit it off. He was funnier in person, which is always a good sign. He talked with his hands, had this low chuckle that made me want to lean in closer, and told me about his job designing album art for indie musicians. I told him about my chaotic roommates, my job at a startup that barely paid my rent, and how I once accidentally shaved off part of my eyebrow trying to clean it up. Somewhere between the second and third cocktail, he leaned in and said, "Want to head back to mine?" I said yes. Not because I was planning anything wild, but because I liked the way he said it. Casual, hopeful, like he couldn't believe his own luck. We Ubered back to his place, a rented house on the east side that he shared with 3 roommates. I'd been in enough shared homes to know the drill. Empty pizza boxes, faint smell of weed, and at least one mysterious stain on the couch nobody talks about. But his place surprised me. Clean. Cozy. A couple of candles on the coffee table, and a soft lo-fi playlist coming from a Bluetooth speaker tucked on a shelf near the TV. He offered me water, then kissed me like he meant it. One thing led to another, and soon we were in his room, the door shut, the lights dimmed. I'm not going to get graphic, but let's just say things escalated. We were kind of tangled up in each other, and it was going well. Really well. Then it happened. Right as he was getting into the rhythm of things, right as I was thinking, wow, this is actually kind of amazing, I heard it. A voice. His voice. Coming from the living room speaker. Loud. Clear. Moaning. My brain short-circuited for a second. I blinked, confused, thinking maybe it was a neighbor's TV, or I was hallucinating. Then I realized what was happening. Jasper's phone had auto-connected to the living room Bluetooth speaker, and it was playing an audio recording of him, moaning, loudly, over and over. I froze. He froze. We both just stared at each other, horrified. Outside the bedroom door, I heard voices. Laughter. Someone gasped. Then, "Bro, is that you?" someone shouted from the living room, followed by cackling. Jasper scrambled off the bed, tripping over his jeans, grabbing his phone like it was a grenade. He frantically swiped at the screen, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato. I didn't mean," he stammered. The moaning cut off. Silence. Then even more laughter from the other side of the wall. I pulled the comforter up around me, eyes wide. "Was that you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded miserably. I record sometimes. For personal reasons. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or melt into the floor. We sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds. Then a knock on the door. "Y'all good in there?" Another roommate called out, trying, and failing not to laugh. Jasper threw a pillow at the door. "Shut up, Caleb." I couldn't help it. I started giggling. Not because it wasn't embarrassing. It absolutely was. But because it was so absurd, so spectacularly awkward that my brain just gave up. Jasper looked at me, eyes wide. "Are you mad?" "Mad," I said. "No." "Traumatized?" "Maybe." We both laughed. The moment had already gone from romantic to ridiculous, and there was no recovering it. He offered me his hoodie, and we sat on the bed, sipping water and trying to pretend we were in a different timeline. One where his entire friend group hadn't just heard him, vocalizing. Eventually I said, "So, is this a regular habit?" He groaned. "No. I was experimenting with voice memos. I didn't think my phone would auto-connect. I forgot I used that speaker earlier today." I nodded. "Well, you've got range." He buried his face in his hands. "I'm never going to live this down," he mumbled. "Probably not," I said, smiling. He walked me out maybe 20 minutes later. The living room had fallen quiet, but I could feel the stares from the hallway. I didn't look anyone in the eye. When I got home, I had a text waiting. "I'm so sorry. Please tell me you're not going to tell everyone." I thought about it. Then I replied, "Only if I can use it as a cautionary tale." He sent back a skull emoji and a fair. We didn't go on a second date. Not because of the Bluetooth incident. Honestly, I kind of respected that he owned it after the fact, but because I think we both knew that something that starts with your moans on surround sound might not be built for the long haul. Still, I learned a few things that night. Always check your Bluetooth settings. Never record yourself unless you know exactly where that file is going. And no matter how bad a date gets, someone somewhere has had it worse. There's a moment early in every first date where you both silently decide if this is going anywhere. It usually happens somewhere between ordering drinks and the first real laugh, or awkward silence. With Vanessa, that moment never came. Not because it was unclear, but because she showed up like she'd already made up her mind about me. We met through a dating app that boasted about pairing people for long-term compatibility. In reality, it just meant you answered a bunch of personality questions and got matched with others who also claimed to like dogs, books, and meaningful conversations. Vanessa's profile was clean and confident. She looked put together, had photos from what looked like a vineyard, and her bio read, "Done with games. Looking for someone dependable and goal-oriented. Must love structure." I should have known. We settled on a sushi place I suggested, minimalist decor, quiet, and not trying to be anything more than it was. I arrived on time, but Vanessa was already seated, scrolling through her phone with the intensity of someone reviewing financial reports. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Right on time. I like punctuality." I smiled back and slid into the seat across from her. Her energy was sharp, not unfriendly, but unmistakably focused. Within 2 minutes, she was already asking questions. "What do you do for work? How long have you been there? What's your growth trajectory? Do you rent or own?" It felt less like a date and more like a pre-screening for a future spouse. I answered as best I could, trying to stay light, but her questions kept pulling the conversation back to logistics. Eventually, I asked her what she did. "I'm in tech recruiting," she said. "But I already looked you up." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "I found your LinkedIn," she continued. "Saw your company, your role. Based on averages, I'd say you're in a good income bracket." I blinked. "You researched that?" She nodded. "Of course. I don't date aimlessly. Time is the most valuable resource we have." I took a sip of water to buy myself a second. Vanessa wasn't being rude. She wasn't even smug. She was just factual, like she genuinely believed she was saving us both time by skipping to the vetting stage. I tried to pivot. "So, what do you do for fun?" She tilted her head. "That stuff changes. Hobbies are fluid. Stability isn't." Then came a short monologue about how she was done with situationships, how she'd wasted too much time on people who didn't have a plan, and how she wasn't here to figure things out. She said, "At this age, it's not about chemistry, it's about compatibility." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Every part of the night felt like a checklist being reviewed in real time. She hadn't touched her drink. I'd barely touched mine. At one point, she leaned in slightly and said, "You seem like the kind of guy who's loyal. Not flashy, but steady." That's rare. I didn't know if that was supposed to be a compliment or a job offer. Then she added, "You're the kind of man I could see raising kids with, not exciting, but dependable." That was when I felt myself check out. I wasn't expecting fireworks, but I did want to feel like I was on a date with a person, not being assessed for a role in someone's 5-year plan. I said I had an early morning the next day, which was true, but also beside the point. She seemed surprised, like the idea that I might not be interested hadn't even occurred to her. "Want to grab dessert at a place nearby?" she asked. "Thanks, but I'll pass," I said gently. We split the bill, no argument, no awkwardness. Just two people completing a transaction. Outside, we lingered for a moment too long. She said, "This was productive." I wasn't sure if she was joking. "Yeah," I said. "Take care." She nodded, turned, and walked off, probably already mentally adjusting her calendar. On the drive home, I kept replaying the evening. Vanessa hadn't been rude, or mean, or even pushy. She was just clinical, like she'd constructed a relationship in her head and was waiting for the right person to fill in the blanks. I hadn't been a person to her. I'd been a profile that passed the first few filters. She didn't text me afterward, and I didn't reach out either. We both knew. Brunch is supposed to be easy, light, a soft entry into someone's world. That's what I told myself as I waited outside the cafe Jessica had chosen, an airy spot with hanging succulents and a chalkboard menu that used words like wholesome and nourishing. We'd matched a week ago, and she'd suggested brunch almost immediately. Nothing better than good coffee and good company, she'd texted. Her profile was full of energy, travel photos, a picture of her holding a baby, her niece, she clarified, and a bio that read, nonprofit worker, future dog mom, and 100% ready for real life. She arrived right on time, wearing a light denim jacket and a floral dress that matched the cheerful tone of her messages. She greeted me with a quick hug and a bright smile. "You're already seated," she said. "I like punctuality." We ordered quickly. She went for avocado toast and turmeric tea. I got French toast and black coffee. The first stretch of conversation was easy. She talked about her job at a community center, her passion for early childhood development, and her recent trip to Portugal. I told her about my work in content strategy, my cat Milo, and the time I got lost on a hiking trail and ended up at a wedding I wasn't invited to. It was going well, until she leaned in smiling and asked, "So, do you see yourself having kids someday?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I'd been here before. I took a sip of coffee. "Actually, no. I don't think I want kids." Her smile didn't falter, but something shifted. "Really? Like not ever?" I nodded. "It's something I've thought a lot about. It's not for me." She leaned back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's surprising. You seem nurturing." "I care about people," I said. "But that doesn't mean I want to be a parent." She tilted her head. "But don't you think you might change your mind?" "People do. Especially when they find the right person." I forced a smile. "I don't think I'm just waiting to be convinced." She laughed, but it was tight. I used to say the same thing. Then I hit 30 and realized I didn't want to wake up in my 40s with no one calling me mom. "That's valid," I said. "But not wanting the same thing doesn't mean I'm lost." She nodded, then added, "It's just hard for me to imagine not wanting that. Kids give life meaning." I raised an eyebrow. "My life already has meaning." Jessica took a sip of her tea, then said, "But don't you think it's kind of selfish? To not want to pass on what you've learned? Or to not raise someone who could make the world better?" I sat back. I don't think raising a child is the only way to contribute. And I'd argue it's more selfish to have kids just because everyone else is doing it. She blinked. "That's not why I want them." "I believe you," I said. "But I'm not trying to argue. I just know myself. I'm not going to change my mind in 5 years. Or 10. Jessica gave a small, polite smile. "You might. People evolve." "Sure," I said. "But this is a core value, not a phase." The check arrived. She reached for it without hesitation. "I've got this," she said. "You really don't have to." "I insist," she said. "Consider it my contribution to the population decline." I laughed, but it was hollow. Something in her tone had turned sharp. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, and the street buzzed with strollers and sidewalk chalk. We stood near the cafe entrance, both knowing the date was over. "I had a nice time," she said. "Me too," I replied, meaning it in the narrowest sense. "But really," she added, "you seem like someone who'd make a great dad. Maybe you're just scared." I blinked. "I'm not scared. I'm aware of what I want." She shrugged. "Well, I hope you figure it out." I nodded. "I already have." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I turned and walked away. That afternoon, she sent a text. "This morning was lovely. I still think we have a lot in common. Let me know if you want to keep the conversation going, smiley face." I didn't reply. Because I'm not looking for someone who sees me as a project or a puzzle to solve. I'm not interested in dates that feel like debates or futures that come with conditions. I want someone who listens, who trusts me when I say I know myself. Someone who respects that a full life doesn't have to include parenthood. That love isn't measured in diapers or family portraits, but in understanding. And I'd rather be alone than explained away. Some first dates start with a flirt. Others start with a question. Lauren started with a quiz. We met on a dating app that leaned heavily into values and compatibility. Every prompt seemed designed to spark a debate or a TED Talk. Lauren's profile wasn't coy about what mattered to her: social justice, environmental ethics, and full-spectrum political awareness. She described herself as principled, passionate, and not here to babysit centrists. I admired the clarity. Her photos showed her at protests, holding signs with clever slogans, and once with a rescued greyhound named Clementine. I thought, this is someone who cares. That's good. That's rare. We matched quickly, and within a day we were exchanging long, thoughtful messages. She was articulate and direct, with a sharp sense of humor. When she asked if I wanted to meet for drinks, I said yes without hesitation. We chose a bar known for its craft cocktails and left-leaning clientele. Think reclaimed wood tables, compostable straws, and a drink menu that referenced Marx more than mixology. I arrived first. She walked in wearing a t-shirt with a political slogan across the chest and sat down with the energy of someone used to leading conversations. "Glad you're on time," she said. "Punctuality is the lowest bar for respect." I smiled. "Good to meet you too." We ordered drinks, and before mine even arrived, she launched into her first question. "Where do you stand on prison abolition?" It wasn't a trap. Not exactly. But it wasn't small talk either. I answered honestly. I said I supported reform, believed in restorative justice, and was still learning about abolition. I admitted I hadn't read all the key texts yet, but I was open to them. She tilted her head. "So, you're not fully there yet?" "I'm trying to be thoughtful," I said. "Not just repeat what sounds good." She hummed, clearly filing that away. Next came climate change. "Do you vote in local environmental measures? What's your stance on degrowth?" Then foreign policy. Then healthcare. Then the ethics of space exploration. At first, I tried to keep up. I care about these things. I read. I vote. I show up. But everything I said felt like a wrong answer. If I agreed, she'd probe to check if I knew why. If I hesitated or admitted nuance, she'd sigh. "You're not one of those both sides have valid points people, are you?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I don't think every disagreement is a moral failure, either." She frowned. "That's privilege talking." I blinked. "Because I think people can disagree without being evil." She leaned back. "You're very measured. Almost cautious. Is that a bad thing?" "It's not very useful," she said. "We need people who are willing to take hard stances. Not just think peace moderates." I laughed nervously. I didn't realize this was an exam. She didn't laugh back. "It's not. It's a filter." I took a sip of my drink. It was stronger than I expected. I needed it. "Do you ever just talk?" I asked. "Like about art? Or bad dates? Or favorite road trip snacks?" She raised an eyebrow. "That stuff's fine, but it's not why I date." "Why do you date then?" "To find someone aligned. Someone I don't have to educate or argue with. Someone who agrees with you on everything? Someone who understands the stakes," she said. "Who doesn't need convincing." I nodded slowly. "And if someone's close but not perfect? They're part of the problem." There it was. The purity test. I don't mind passionate people. I admire conviction. But what Lauren wanted wasn't a partner. She wanted a carbon copy of herself, someone who'd say the right things, read the right books, vote the right way, and never challenge her worldview. It didn't feel like connection. It felt like auditioning. I finished my drink and set it down. "You seem incredibly smart," I said. "And I think your values are real. But I don't think I'm what you're looking for." She didn't seem surprised. "Probably not." We split the tab. No drama. Just two people who failed each other's criteria. "Outside," she said. "I hope you keep reading. There's still time." "Thanks," I said. "Good luck." I walked away feeling strangely relieved. I met Claire on a Sunday afternoon, while waiting in line at a local bookstore's cafe. We both reached for the same copy of a poetry collection, one of those small, sad books with a minimalist cover that's always displayed near the register. She laughed, said, "You have good taste," and I responded with something equally forgettable. 5 minutes later, we were sitting at a tiny table with coffee cups between us, talking about everything from music to why the self-help section is always next to the cookbooks. It was spontaneous, easy, and surprisingly warm. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few days we texted often. Her messages were clever, peppered with obscure quotes and references to art I pretended to know more about than I did. She seemed confident, curious, a little intense, but in a way that made you lean in, not pull back. She suggested dinner the following Friday, and picked a cozy Mediterranean place tucked between a florist and a boutique yoga studio. The kind of restaurant with too many candles and a menu that used words like infused and drizzled a bit too liberally. I arrived a few minutes early. Claire was already there, seated by the window, wearing a navy dress and spinning her water glass slowly between her fingers. She smiled when she saw me, and we hugged lightly, just enough to acknowledge the familiarity we were building. The first 20 minutes were effortless. We talked about books, childhood pets, travel dreams. She had a magnetic way of speaking, pausing just enough to make you feel like your silence was part of the conversation. Then, somewhere between the hummus appetizer and our entrees arriving, the topic of therapy came up. I mentioned casually that I'd started seeing someone last year after a rough patch at work. Nothing dramatic, just burnout, anxiety, the usual millennial exhaustion. I said it helped me gain clarity, learn to set boundaries, and quiet the noise in my head. Claire's expression shifted. She tilted her head, set down her fork, and said, "You've really been to therapy?" I nodded. "Yeah. Why?" She waved a hand dismissively. "I just don't believe in all that." I blinked. "All what?" "Therapy," she said plainly. "It's a scam. People pay strangers to tell them things they already know. It's just a crutch for people who can't handle life." My stomach nodded. I tried to laugh it off, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. I mean, she continued, people used to just deal with things. You had a bad day, you moved on. Now everyone needs a trauma label for having a hard week. I stirred my drink, unsure how to respond. "It's helped me," I said. "It's not about labeling everything. It's about understanding yourself." She shrugged. "Sounds like you just needed to toughen up." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed her, but because they reminded me of every time I'd been told the same thing by someone who didn't understand what it felt like to wake up in the middle of the night with your chest caving in from a panic attack. I wasn't looking for her approval, but I also wasn't prepared for such blatant dismissal. "I think mental health is more complicated than that," I said carefully. Claire rolled her eyes. "We're just overdiagnosed and overcoddled. Everyone wants to be a victim now." I set my fork down. The food, which looked beautiful a moment ago, now felt heavy. "I'm not trying to be a victim," I said. "I just want to be healthy." She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "I'm just being honest," she said. "Most of the people I know who go to therapy just like hearing themselves talk. It's indulgent." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman who quoted Rilke and liked indie films with the one now telling me that seeking help was weakness. It wasn't just a red flag, it was a billboard. I didn't argue. I didn't try to change her mind. I just sat there, letting the silence speak for me. She changed the subject eventually, something about her Pilates instructor and a new herbal supplement she was trying. I nodded, smiled politely, and counted the seconds until it was socially acceptable to leave. When the check came, she offered to split it. I agreed. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. We stood near the sidewalk, the awkwardness between us a tangible thing. "This was nice," she said. I couldn't bring myself to lie, so I just said, "Thanks for dinner." She leaned in for a hug. I gave her a quick one-arm squeeze and stepped back. "Text me," she said. I didn't respond. I just gave a faint smile and walked to my car. I didn't text her. She didn't reach out either. Maybe she could tell I wasn't impressed by her honesty. Or maybe she didn't care. Either way, it was clear we were speaking different languages, hers rooted in dismissal, mine in understanding. Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote down everything she'd said. Not because I wanted to remember it, but because I needed to remind myself why I started therapy in the first place. To unlearn shame. To find softness and strength. To choose connection over performance. When someone tells you, "Trust me, you'll love this place," it usually means one of two things: they have great taste, or they're about to try way too hard to prove they do. Marcus fell squarely into the second category. We'd been talking for a couple of weeks, nothing too heavy, just enough to feel like we weren't total strangers. Marcus was funny, casually confident, and had just the right amount of sarcasm in his texts to make me think he might be refreshing in person. So when he suggested dinner, I said yes. He didn't tell me where we were going, only offered an address and a vague instruction. Dress casual, but not like gym casual. I chose jeans, ankle boots, and a nice top. Safe middle ground. The address led to a steakhouse sandwiched between two office buildings. Not fancy, but clearly trying to be. Lots of dark wood, leather booths, and fake candles flickering on every table. The kind of place that wanted to feel exclusive, even though it was across the street from a dry cleaner. I walked in and spotted Marcus near the back, speaking to a waiter like they were old friends. He waved me over with a grin that implied he'd already planned the entire evening in his head. "Welcome to my spot," he said proudly. "Used to work here. Still technically on the roster." I blinked. "You still work here?" "Part-time," he said, brushing it off. "You know, when they need me. I like to stay connected." I didn't care about that. I've worked my fair share of food service jobs, and anyone who can survive that world has my respect. But the way he said it, like he was expecting applause, was odd. We sat down, and before I could even reach for the menu, he stopped me. Don't worry about ordering, he said with a wink. I've got it covered. I gave a polite laugh, assuming he'd at least ask what I liked. He didn't. He called over the waiter, same one from earlier, and leaned in to whisper something. The waiter gave him a tired nod, like this wasn't the first time Marcus had pulled whatever this was. Then Marcus leaned back and said, "We're getting the best stuff. Off menu." "Off menu?" I asked. He nodded. "Trust me." While we waited, he launched into a story about how he used to be involved in some kind of secret diner program with the restaurant. According to him, select employees were chosen to secretly evaluate the staff, food quality, service, timing, cleanliness. The whole deal. "I'm still kind of involved," he added, pulling a notebook from inside his jacket. "Just doing some quiet quality checks tonight." I blinked. "Wait, you're reviewing them? Like now?" "Yeah." He grinned. "Just be normal. Act like we're on a regular date. I'll handle the rest." I laughed, expecting a punchline. There wasn't one. He opened the notebook and started scribbling something, timing, I guessed, or maybe the temperature of the bread basket. I took a sip of water and glanced around. The staff were definitely avoiding eye contact. "Marcus, does the manager know you're doing this?" "Not officially," he said, "but they'll appreciate it once they see the notes." That's when I realized this wasn't a real program. It was a fantasy he'd created for himself and dragged me into. The food came. 2 massive steaks, sides, and drinks I hadn't ordered. He smiled like he'd nailed it. "I know you don't eat red meat," he said, "but tonight's an exception." I never said I didn't eat red meat, but I also didn't want steak at 8:30 on a Wednesday. I took a couple of bites out of politeness. It was fine. Nothing spectacular. Marcus, however, was eating like a food critic on assignment, holding his fork with exaggerated care, swirling his drink before each sip, jotting notes between bites. Every few minutes, he'd mutter things like, "Presentation could be tighter," or "Service lacks warmth." It was painful to watch. The waiter dropped by to clear our plates and gave me a look, half sympathy, half "get out while you can." Then came the check. Marcus picked it up, frowned, and started muttering about how certain items should have been comped. I assumed he meant the off-menu dishes. Maybe a drink or two. He waved the waiter over. "I'm a loyal staff member," he said. "This was part of an internal evaluation. I have notes for management." The waiter looked confused. "Sir, we don't have any formal evaluation program." Marcus insisted on speaking to the manager. A few minutes later, a tired-looking man in a black button-down came over. Marcus launched into a long speech about how he'd been observing every detail of the service and had compiled a comprehensive report. He actually opened his notebook like it was an official document. The manager stared at him for a few seconds, then said, "Marcus, you haven't worked here in over a year. You can't just come in and fake inspections." The silence at our table was louder than anything happening in the kitchen. Marcus stammered something about just trying to help and asked if the meal was going to be comped. The manager shook his head and walked away. The waiter returned with the full-priced bill. Marcus looked at me and said, "You don't happen to have cash, do you?" I said, "Nope." I didn't even pretend to look. He sighed, pulled out a card, and paid. Still confused, like he couldn't believe they didn't appreciate his insight. On the walk out, he kept muttering about how the place had declined, how they used to value feedback, how maybe he'd send his notes to corporate. I didn't say much. I was too busy replaying the entire night, wondering how I ended up as a guest star in someone else's delusion. Outside, he asked if I wanted to grab drinks at a nearby bar. "I have an early morning," I said. It was the truth, but I'd have said it even if I didn't. That night, I texted my friend. He pretended to be a secret diner and got called out by his own ex-manager. She sent back 10 laughing emojis. Marcus messaged me the next day. "Had a great time. I think we make a good team." I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I wanted the silence to speak for itself. We'd matched on a dating app known for its thoughtful prompts and slightly smug tone. Think less, "What's your favorite pizza topping?" and more, "Describe your relationship with vulnerability." But Jeremy stood out. He had this unfiltered sense of humor in his messages, the kind that made me laugh out loud, not just breathe through my nose. He liked indie films, worked in finance but apparently hated it, and said he was looking for something with substance. I'd rolled my eyes at that last bit, but his messages were refreshingly honest, even self-deprecating. After a couple of weeks of exchanging long texts and short voice notes, we finally agreed to meet. He picked a bar downtown, some trendy spot with Edison bulbs, overpriced cocktails, and a crowd that looked like they were waiting for someone to take their picture. It wasn't really my scene, but I figured I'd give it a shot. He'd made a solid impression, thoughtful, interested, a little quirky in a good way. I thought, at worst, I'd get a decent drink and a story to tell. I arrived first and grabbed a small table near the back. The lighting was warm and dim, and the music was just loud enough to make you lean in to talk. I was halfway through scanning the cocktail list when Jeremy walked in, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, clean-cut, with a relaxed smile. He gave me a quick hug, pulled out his chair, and sat down like we'd done this a dozen times before. "Hey," he said, flashing a grin. "Glad we finally made this happen." "Yeah," I replied. "It's nice to put a voice to a face." Then, without missing a beat, he waved over the waiter. "I'll have a bourbon neat," he said. Then, looking at me, "You'll love the lavender gin fizz. Trust me." I opened my mouth to say I hadn't decided yet, but the waiter was already nodding and walking away. I blinked. "Guess I'm having a lavender gin fizz?" Jeremy laughed. "It's their best drink. You'll thank me." I smiled politely, even though I hate lavender. The drink arrived quickly, and to his credit it was fine. But the small moment of being overridden stuck with me. I brushed it off. First date jitters made people weird sometimes. "So," I said, "how's work been?" He took a sip of bourbon and sighed. "It's been a ride." Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice a little like he was about to tell me a secret. "My wife and I, well, we're kind of figuring things out." I stared at him. "You're what?" "My wife," he said again, casually, like he was telling me he still owned a DVD player. "Technically, we're still married. But emotionally, we're done. It's been over for a while." I froze. "Wait, you're still married?" "Yeah," he said, nodding. "But it's not what you think. We sleep in different rooms. We barely talk. No intimacy. We're just two people sharing a mortgage at this point." I should have left right then. I should have stood up, said thanks for the drink, and walked out into the night like a heroine in a rom-com who finally realized her worth. Instead, I sat there, stunned into silence. Jeremy, apparently interpreting my shock as intrigue, kept going. "She knows I'm out meeting people," he said. "We've both agreed we need to explore what we want, separately. It's not cheating if it's already broken, right?" He raised his glass like he'd just said something profound. I didn't raise mine. "That's a lot," I managed. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to be honest. Most women appreciate that." Then he pulled out his phone and, I kid you not, started scrolling through his photos. "Here," he said, turning the screen toward me. "This is us at our wedding. Crazy, right?" There she was, smiling in a white dress, standing beside the man now sitting across from me, proudly showing me photos like we were reminiscing about a shared past. I didn't know what to say. My brain stalled. What was I supposed to do? Compliment the lighting? Ask about the cake flavor? "We were good together," he said softly. "But people change." She became more of a roommate. A caretaker. I needed something else, someone who sees me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone not searching for a connection, but an escape. He wasn't here to move forward. He was here to prove he could still be wanted. I took a long sip of the gin fizz and set it down. "Jeremy," I said slowly, "you're still married." "Technically," he said again, as if that word changed anything. I shook my head. "You should have said that up front. Before drinks. Before the bar. Before any of this." "I didn't think it would matter," he said. "I mean, we're both adults. We can handle complicated, right?" "This isn't complicated," I said. "This is dishonest." He leaned back, arms crossed. "So you've never been the other woman?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You seem like the type who's been through some stuff," he said. "I figured you'd understand." I stared at him, stunned by how casually he'd reduced me to a stereotype and himself to some misunderstood guy in a midlife crisis. "I'm not a stand-in for your mid-marriage revelation," I said. "I'm a person, not a plot device." He looked annoyed now, like I'd failed some test of coolness. "People are so binary these days," he said, shrugging. "You're either single or you're not. No one wants to admit there's a gray area." "There isn't," I said. "You're married. That's not gray. That's ink black." We sat in silence. I pushed my drink aside, stood up, and grabbed my coat. "I'm leaving," I said. "Good luck with whatever this is." He didn't stop me. Outside, the air hit me like a reset button. I pulled out my phone and texted my roommate one word: disaster. She called immediately, and I told her everything on the walk home. Every bizarre twist, every red flag, every insult to my intelligence. We laughed, The kind of laughter that comes not from joy but from disbelief. Later that night, Jeremy messaged me. He said he was surprised I couldn't handle a little emotional honesty. I didn't respond, because what he'd offered wasn't honesty. It was rationalization, dressed up in self-pity. It was rehearsed, manipulative, and hollow. He wasn't looking for someone new. He was looking for someone to distract him from the mess he refused to clean up. Someone to tell him he was brave for stepping out of his marriage while still hiding inside it. But I'm not anyone's emotional band-aid. I'm not here to help someone feel less guilty about the lies they're still telling themselves. So I deleted the app the next morning. Not forever, just for a while. I wasn't supposed to go out that night. In fact, I'd made a personal promise that I was taking a break from dating apps, socializing, and anything that required more effort than deciding which sauce to drizzle over my pad thai while watching reruns of old cooking competitions. But my roommate, part cheerleader, part therapist, had been staging a gentle intervention about my lifestyle choices. According to her, spending every weekend in elastic-waisted pants and debating the merits of air fryer recipes wasn't exactly thriving. So, with less enthusiasm than it takes to microwave popcorn, I reopened the app and matched with Haley. She had a kind smile in her photos, curly hair tied up in a loose bun, and a bio that read, "Single mom, book lover, pancakes over waffles always." Something about it felt grounded, like she wasn't trying to be anyone but herself. She didn't use a million filters or talk about manifesting energy, which was rare. We messaged for a few days, easy conversation, a few jokes, and mutual gripes about how dating feels like a part-time job where nobody's paying you. Eventually, she suggested grabbing a bite at this local diner just a few blocks from my place. It was the kind of spot where the booths were cracked, the mugs were chipped, and everything smelled faintly of syrup and bacon grease. I liked it already. I got there 5 minutes early, ordered a black coffee to kill time, and took a seat by the window. The place was warm, humming with low conversation and the occasional clatter from the kitchen. For the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism. Not fireworks, just the subtle kind, the kind that comes with the scent of waffles and the possibility of conversation with someone who might genuinely get you. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting Haley with a nervous smile and maybe a breathless apology for being late. Instead, she was there, with a toddler on her hip. He looked about 2, cheeks flushed, eyes bleary like he'd just been woken from a nap he hadn't agreed to. His head lolled against her shoulder as he squirmed, a small hand reaching up to tug at her earring. "Hope it's okay," she said brightly, like this was totally normal. My sitter bailed last minute. I blinked. "Oh, yeah, no problem." My face must have betrayed something because she added, "I figured we'd just keep it low-key, he's usually chill." I nodded, even though nothing about this felt low-key anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sure what I was. Just surprised. Nobody had mentioned a +1, and certainly not one in pull-ups. We slid into a booth, with Haley settling the little boy, Milo, she told me, next to her. He immediately grabbed a spoon from the table and began banging it rhythmically against the laminated menu like he was auditioning for a toddler drumline. Haley rummaged through her oversized bag and produced a tablet, propping it up in front of him. A cartoon began playing, something loud, colorful, and painfully repetitive. The kind of show that repeats the same song about cleaning up toys every 3 minutes. Milo quieted, mesmerized by the screen. "So," Haley said, brushing a curl behind her ear and smiling at me like she hadn't just brought a small child to a first date, "tell me about your week." I tried. I really did. But it was hard to focus while a song about putting blocks in a basket played on loop. And even harder when Milo started dropping bits of pancake from the next booth over onto the floor. Haley began talking fast. Something about her ex, how he was unreliable and inconsistent, how she hadn't planned on being a single parent but was doing the best she could. She said she wasn't even sure she should be dating again, but she felt like she deserved something for herself. Something adult. Something normal. I nodded, sipping my coffee, trying to respond appropriately, but it felt less like a date and more like I'd stumbled into a mid-season episode of her life. She kept talking, voice speeding up like she was trying to beat a clock I couldn't see. Meanwhile, Milo giggled at the tablet, dropped a fork, and began trying to unzip the jacket he was sitting on. Just as I was about to suggest ordering, Haley glanced at her phone and stood up. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I need to take this. Just a sec." Then she was gone, out the door, phone pressed to her ear, pacing on the sidewalk. I assumed it would be a quick call. Something unavoidable. Maybe work. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The waiter came by, and I stalled. "We're still deciding," I said with a weak smile, watching Haley outside, gesturing wildly with one hand while Milo began to whimper beside me. I turned to the boy, who had started tapping the tablet hard with both hands. The screen dimmed. He looked up at me, confused. Hang on," I said, fumbling with the device. It was locked. Passcode protected. His bottom lip quivered. "Want some juice?" I offered, pointing to the small cup she'd left behind. He grabbed it, then immediately tried to pour the contents into the salt shaker. I gently pulled it away. He let out a wail. Heads turned. I smiled awkwardly at the nearby table. 2 older women, watching like they were witnessing a social experiment unfold. Milo's cries escalated into a full-on meltdown. I tried everything, napkins, silly faces, even a spoon puppet. Nothing worked. Finally, after what felt like 25 years, but was probably 25 minutes, Haley returned. She looked frazzled, windblown, and slightly dazed. "Sorry," she said, sliding into the booth like nothing had happened. "My ex. It got complicated." She reached for the menu, then her phone, scrolling absently. No apology. No acknowledgement of the scene that had just unfolded. No thanks for keeping her child from flipping the salt shaker into the air. Just, "Do you like pancakes?" I stared at her. "I think I need to head out soon," I said as gently as I could. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Okay." I didn't bother with an excuse. I didn't say I had an early morning or a thing to get to. I just stood up, dropped a 10 on the table even though we hadn't ordered anything, and left. Outside, the air felt different, cool, quiet, still. As I walked home, I kept turning the whole thing over in my head. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just confused. What exactly had she thought was going to happen? That we'd form a bond over French toast and spilled juice? That I'd prove myself by passing some kind of spontaneous parenting test? Look, I get it, life happens. People have kids. Emergencies come up. But bringing your toddler to a first date and then disappearing for 30 minutes without a word? That's not life being messy. That's someone not respecting your time. She unmatched me the next day. I met Caleb during the late stages of a particularly uninspiring winter. One of those stretches where the days feel like reruns and your phone becomes less of a tool and more of a desperate lifeline. After weeks of scrolling through profiles that blurred together into the same few phrases, love adventures, sarcastic banter, looking for my person, I landed on his. His bio read like someone trying to seem deep without trying too hard. Hiker. Thinker. Appreciator of long conversations and short bios. He used a lot of emojis, which normally would have been a red flag, but he responded with full sentences and asked genuine questions, which was rare enough to overlook the smiley overkill. We matched on an app that tried to psychoanalyze you before showing you potential dates. I'd answered over 150 insightful questions about my values, communication style, and favorite condiments. Caleb had supposedly scored high in compatibility, and after a week of messaging about everything from 90s cartoons to our mutual hatred of small talk, I agreed to meet up. I hadn't been on a real first date in months, and I convinced myself this could be something good, or at least not a disaster. He suggested dinner at a place called La Rosetta, an Italian spot downtown with low lighting and high Yelp ratings. Online it looked charming, think warm tones, rustic decor, and pictures of spaghetti that made you believe in carbs again. In person, it felt like a restaurant that couldn't decide if it wanted to be upscale or just really into tablecloths. I got there early, hoping to skip the awkward "Are you my date?" eye contact game. I found a table near the back and fiddled with the water glass until he arrived. Caleb walked in 5 minutes late, wearing a blazer that looked like it had seen better days and jeans that didn't quite match. The contrast was jarring, like he had dressed for a business casual event and then got lost on the way to a brewery. He gave me a side hug that felt like an HR-approved gesture and sat down without missing a beat. "Good to finally meet you," he said, flashing a grin that made me feel like he knew something I didn't. I was reaching for the menu when he casually took it out of my hands and closed it. "I already checked the reviews," he said. "We'll have the veal parm and a bottle of the house red. Something Italian-sounding." He flagged the waiter with a snap of his fingers, not even glancing at me. I blinked. Was this a joke? Was I supposed to be impressed by this level of assertiveness? At first I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was being ironic. But he wasn't. He leaned in and said, "You'll love it. Most women I date appreciate a man who takes charge." That was the moment I knew I was in for a long night. I tried to pivot the conversation to something light: music, weekend plans, our mutual dislike of pineapple on pizza. But Caleb swerved into a monologue about how society has been upside down since the 60s. He talked about how men were losing their voices and how feminism was no longer about equality but about revenge. I wasn't sure if I should interrupt or just let him burn himself out. I picked the second option, hoping he'd tire himself out like a toddler mid-tantrum. But instead, he doubled down. He told me he was an independent thinker, which I later learned translated to Reddit threads and a podcast hosted by a guy who once got banned from Twitter for hate speech. He explained with a straight face that he didn't think women should vote because they vote with their emotions, and that's why society's so divided. I stared at him, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. It was like watching someone try to explain history through a YouTube conspiracy video. The couple at the table next to us glanced over, their expressions somewhere between pity and disbelief. I took a sip of wine to avoid saying what I was thinking. Every time I emptied my glass, Caleb refilled it like he was doing me a favor. The food arrived, but I'd lost my appetite. I thought about eating just to pass the time, but I couldn't stop picturing myself flipping the plate into his lap and walking out. Halfway through the meal, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place and watch Jordan Peterson videos. I gave a nervous laugh and told him I had an early morning. He nodded solemnly and said, "I respect discipline in a woman. It's rare these days." We sat in silence waiting for the check. He paid, which surprised me, but not before declaring, "I don't believe in splitting the bill. Some traditions are worth keeping." I nodded, not in agreement, just in survival. The walkout felt like a marathon. At the curb, he tried to hold my hand. I faked adjusting my bag. He leaned in for a hug, and I gave him the kind of one-arm gesture you reserve for a dentist you hope to never see again. "Let's do this again sometime," he said. "Yeah, maybe," I mumbled, already walking away. When I got home, I blocked him before I even took off my shoes. I wasn't angry, just baffled. The whole date felt like a parody. Like someone had dared him to say the most offensive things possible, while still expecting a second date. I've told the story to my friends a dozen times now. We laugh about it. Caleb, the guy who thinks chivalry is ordering your food for you, and democracy should exclude half the population. The guy who thought pouring wine and quoting fringe forums made him a gentleman. But the truth is, it stuck with me, not just because of how absurd it was, but because it reminded me how easy it is to ignore red flags in the first 15 minutes when you're trying to be optimistic. When you're telling yourself people deserve a chance. When you're trying not to give up on dating altogether. But some people don't hide who they are. They say it out loud, clear as day, like they expect you to applaud their boldness. And you just sit there, holding a fork, wondering how fast you can eat your overpriced veal without choking, so you can get out without making a scene. So lesson learned. No more dates with men who call themselves truth seekers. That's just code for someone who doesn't want to hear yours. I like to think of myself as a pretty put-together person. I had a decent apartment in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, an espresso machine I actually used, and a curated record collection that practically begged for someone to ask, "Wow, you like vinyl?" I had also been single for way too long. So when I matched with Theo, a tall, soft-spoken guy with dimples and a suspiciously well-behaved golden retriever, I figured it was finally time to break the cycle of first dates that ended in ghosting, group texts, or gastrointestinal trauma. We matched on Sunday. By Wednesday, we were texting constantly. By Friday, we had plans to meet. He picked me up with a bouquet of sunflowers, which was a bold move considering we hadn't even exchanged last names yet. But honestly, I wasn't mad about it. He smelled like cedarwood and wore a flannel that looked like it had been ironed on purpose. I liked his energy, calm, thoughtful, a little dorky in the best way. We grabbed dinner at a cozy ramen spot downtown and walked through Cheeseman Park afterward, talking about everything from horror movies to our mutual hatred of group brunches. By the time we got back to my apartment, it felt natural to ask, "Want to come up for a bit?" He smiled. "I'd like that." What I didn't remember, what I truly should have remembered, was that earlier that morning I'd taken a shower. A very relaxing one. And in that shower was a particular item I typically stored away after use. An item that had, up until that day, never betrayed me. But on this fateful Friday, I'd been running late. I'd left in a hurry. And I'd forgotten one crucial detail. My companion, let's call it, was still stuck to the tile wall. Still suction cupped. Still blinking, thanks to a dying battery that refused to just give up and die with dignity. We got inside, kicked off our shoes, and I gave him the tour. That's the kitchen. That's the living room. Bathroom's right there if you need it. He headed straight for the bathroom. I didn't think twice until I heard the door open. Then silence. Then an audible pause. And then, my blood ran cold. I sprinted mentally through every possible disaster scenario, but I already knew the truth. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood frozen in the hallway, just outside the bathroom, like a sim whose path had been blocked. Theo stepped out slowly. He looked conflicted. I looked at him. He looked at me. We both said nothing for a full 5 seconds, until he broke the silence. So, is it motion activated? I blinked. What? He gestured vaguely toward the bathroom. It's blinking. Like rhythmically. Is that normal? I wanted to evaporate. Die. Melt into the hardwood floorboards and seep into the pipes below. It's not supposed to blink, I mumbled, voice barely audible. The battery's dying. It's not on. He nodded slowly, lips pressed together, trying very hard not to laugh. I wasn't sure if I should salute it or unplug it. I let out a laugh, sharp, nervous, too loud. I usually put it away. I just forgot. It's been a long week. He nodded again, now smiling. No judgment. I mean, hey, it looks efficient. I groaned and dropped my face into my hands. Please stop talking about it. We stood there in awkward silence for another few seconds. Then he said gently, Do you want me to pretend I didn't see it? I looked up at him, half laughing, half dying. Yes, please. I would very much appreciate that. He gave me a mock salute. Acknowledged. I walked into the bathroom, grabbed the blinking pink embarrassment off the wall, and threw it into a drawer like it had personally betrayed me. I slammed the drawer shut, washed my hands out of sheer panic, and returned to the living room. Theo was sitting on the couch like nothing had happened, scrolling through his phone. I sat down beside him. So, I asked, Are you traumatized? He smiled. Not at all. Honestly, I'm just relieved it wasn't a security camera or something. That made me laugh harder than I expected. We ended up talking for another hour, mostly about ridiculous dating stories. I told him about the guy who brought his mom to our second date. He told me about a woman who insisted on doing a full tarot reading before she'd let him kiss her. By the time he left, the mood was light again. He hugged me at the door and said, Thanks for being cool, and for not pretending to be perfect. I texted him 10 minutes later. Thanks for not running screaming from my bathroom. He replied, Your toy and I have reached a peaceful coexistence. No hard feelings. We went on a second date, and a third. Eventually, the story of the forgotten toy became an inside joke, one we told close friends, always with a lot of side-eye and laughter. But I never forgot the lesson. Before any date, especially one that might end in a tour of your apartment, check the bathroom. Every time. Because dead batteries blink. And suction cups hold stronger than your dignity. It had been a while since I let someone over. Not just for a date, but into my space, my apartment, my quiet, guarded life. After a string of awkward or outright awful experiences, I'd taken a long break from dating. But like most things, loneliness has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. That's how I ended up matching with Luca. His profile was clean and understated. No shirtless photos. No lists of demands. Just a few pictures, him at a record store, standing in front of a bookstore, one where he was holding a bowl of ramen. His bio read, If you like horror movies, late-night walks, and overthinking everything, we'll probably get along. That last line got me. We talked for about 10 days before meeting. It was easy the way we texted. He was clever, but not performative. He didn't ask for selfies or make weird comments. Our conversations drifted from music to philosophy to childhood memories. He told me his favorite movie was The Thing, which immediately scored points. I told him mine was Rosemary's Baby, and he said, That's a slow burn but brutal. I like it. We decided to meet for a movie on a Thursday night. I picked the film, an indie horror flick playing at a tiny old theater downtown with sticky floors and seats that creaked like bones. He met me outside, right on time. He looked just like his photos, tall, slightly disheveled, wearing a worn hoodie and jeans. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the street noise, but he smiled when he saw me and said, You're real. You too, I replied. The movie was decent, creepy, atmospheric, not particularly gory. He didn't try to hold my hand or make any moves during the film, which I appreciated. Afterward, we walked a few blocks under the dim glow of streetlights, talking about the ending, the cinematography, the score. When we reached my apartment, I hesitated at the front door. He noticed. "If you're not comfortable, it's okay," he said. "No pressure." I looked at him, earnest, calm, a touch of melancholy in his expression, and made a choice I wouldn't usually make. "No, it's fine," I said. "You can come in. Just for a bit." He followed me up the stairs, quiet and polite. I lived alone in a second-floor unit of a converted duplex. One bedroom, small kitchen, creaky wood floors. I flipped on the living room lamp and motioned for him to sit on the couch. "Make yourself at home," I said. "Want anything? Water? Tea?" "Water's good," he replied. I brought him a glass and sat across from him. We kept talking, about everything and nothing. He asked about the books on my shelf, and I told him which ones I'd actually read. He noticed the tarot deck on my table and asked if I ever used it. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when I'm feeling indecisive." He smiled. "I like that." Around midnight, I asked if he was hungry. He nodded. I could eat. I made us sandwiches, nothing fancy, just turkey and cheese with mustard, and we ate while sitting on the floor, backs against the couch. It felt comfortable. Familiar, even though we barely knew each other. After we finished, he looked at me and said, "Mind if I crash here? Just for a few hours. I've got a long drive back." He lived about 40 minutes away, and it was late. I considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Couch only, though." "Of course," he said immediately. "I won't overstep." I gave him a pillow and a blanket, turned off the lights, and went to bed. That should have been the end of it. But I woke up around 1:08 a.m., heart thudding. At first, I wasn't sure what had stirred me. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the blinds. I sat up and listened. Silence. Then a faint sound. A shuffle, like something brushing against the hallway wall. I slipped out of bed and walked slowly to the door, opening it just a crack. The living room was empty. The blanket and pillow were on the couch, undisturbed. But Luca was gone. I stepped out, calling softly, "Luca?" No answer. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, light off. I nudged it open. Empty. The front door unlocked. Not wide open, but not fully closed either. Just hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. I felt a chill run through me. I walked to the door, closed it, and locked both the knob and the deadbolt. My hands were shaking. Maybe he left. Maybe he had an emergency. Maybe he didn't want to wake me. But why leave the door open? I turned around to head back to my room, and froze. There was a sound outside the window. Faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Shuffling across the gravel path behind the building. I moved toward the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. But then I heard it again, closer now. Like someone dragging their feet. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. No sign from Luca. I texted him. "Where did you go?" No response. I waited. Listened. The footsteps faded. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake until dawn, clutching my phone, ears straining for any sound. By 6 a.m., I gave up and got dressed. I made coffee, checked the locks again, and sat by the front window waiting for, I don't know what, an explanation, an apology, a knock. Nothing came. At 8:12 a.m., I finally got a text. "Hey, sorry I left. Got called to help a friend. Didn't want to wake you." I stared at the message for a long time. "You left the door open," I replied. "And you didn't say goodbye." No answer. I opened the app we matched on. His profile was gone. Deleted. I searched his name on every platform I could think of. Nothing. It was like he disappeared. I never heard from him again after that. By the time I met him, I already knew how to spot the kind of guy who liked cars more than people. I'd been going to car meets since I was 17, first tagging along with my cousin, then later showing up on my own, camera in hand, capturing rollers and engine bay shots for a local car club's Instagram. I wasn't a mechanic, and I didn't know every engine spec by heart, but I knew enough to hold a conversation. More importantly, I knew how to keep my distance. His name was Ethan. We met at a dusk meet in a grocery store parking lot on the west side of town. It was mostly the usual crowd, guys with lowered Civics, Subarus with mismatched panels, Mustangs revving too loud for no reason. I was taking a picture of a matte black 350Z, when I heard someone behind me say, "That's my car." I turned, and there he was. Hoodie zipped halfway, hands buried in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but still somehow proud. "It's clean," I said. "Subtle." He smiled a little. "I've had it for a few years. Still working out the kinks." We talked for about 15 minutes. He had the kind of quiet voice that made you lean in, but not in a manipulative way. Just soft-spoken. He told me he worked in IT at a local college and spent most of his weekends tuning his car or driving out to the hills to clear his head. I liked that. He didn't flirt. He didn't brag. He didn't ask for my number. But he did add me on Snapchat that night after one of the other guys tagged me in a group photo. Over the next few weeks, we messaged almost every night. He'd send pictures of his car parts, ask for advice on fitment, or just snap his cat curled up on his dashboard. I sent him photos of my camera gear, videos from the meets, and the occasional dog photo. He was sweet, funny in a dry way, and always respectful. Eventually, he asked if I wanted to grab food sometime. I agreed, nervous but curious. We planned to meet at a burger spot near the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet and had outdoor seating. I got there first. When Ethan arrived, he wasn't alone. 3 other guys got out of the car with him. 2 of them I recognized from the meets, the third I didn't. They were loud, already laughing about something, reeking of vape juice and cheap cologne. Ethan looked sheepish as he walked up to me. "Hey," he said. "Hope it's okay. They were hanging out at my place and didn't want to sit at home." I blinked. "I thought this was just us?" "Yeah, it is," he said quickly. "They'll chill at a different table. No big deal." But it was a big deal. The whole vibe shifted. One of the guys, Jay I think, grinned at me like he already knew everything about me. The other one kept staring at my legs. I tried to ignore it, focusing on Ethan, who seemed more reserved than usual, barely making eye contact. We ordered food. The guys sat a few tables away, but kept interjecting into our conversation. Comments like, "Yo, Ethan, tell her about the time you almost crashed trying to impress a girl." Or, "You're lucky, she's way out of your league." I tried to laugh it off. Halfway through the meal, I got up to use the restroom. When I came back, one of them had moved to our table. "Just keeping the seat warm," he said, grinning. I didn't sit back down. Instead, I pulled Ethan aside. "I'm gonna head out," I said quietly. This wasn't what I expected. He looked stunned. "Wait, are you mad?" "I'm uncomfortable," I said. "That's different." He looked at the ground. "I didn't think they'd be like this." "But you brought them." He didn't respond. I turned and walked toward the parking lot. As I approached my car, I noticed Jay and the other guy following me, slowly but deliberately. They weren't saying anything, just trailing a few steps behind. I stopped walking and turned around. "Something you need?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. They looked at each other and laughed. "Nah," Jay said. "Just making sure you get to your car safe. Ethan's worried. Tell Ethan to worry about himself." I unlocked my car with a sharp beep, climbed in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a second, heart racing, watching them in the rearview mirror as they slowly wandered back toward the restaurant. I didn't even put my seatbelt on until I was halfway down the road. That night, Ethan messaged me. "Sorry again. I didn't think it would go like that." I didn't answer. He messaged again 2 days later. "Can we talk?" I messed up. Still, I said nothing. Because here's the thing, being shy isn't an excuse for being spineless. He could have told them no. He could have stood up for me. He could have made me feel safe. Instead, he let his friends hijack our time together and turn it into something that felt more like a setup than a date. I stopped going to meets for a while after that. When I finally went back, I didn't see Ethan. I heard he'd moved out of town, maybe for a job, maybe just for a fresh start. Part of me hoped he learned something. I had never been great at dating, or socializing, or doing much of anything that required speaking to strangers without rehearsed lines. I was 24, freshly out of college, and living in a small apartment in Boise, Idaho, trying to figure out how to transition from being the quiet kid in class to someone who could hold a conversation on a date without breaking into a full-body sweat. I had read books about confidence. I had watched YouTube videos about posture and eye contact. I had even gone so far as to practice small talk in the mirror. But nothing quite prepared me for Amelia. I met her on an app called Lantern, one of those designed for introverts. You filled out essays instead of bios, and the app matched people based on long-form answers instead of swipes. Amelia's profile was warm, funny, and full of dry wit. She loved obscure horror films, worked as a veterinary tech, and had a dog named Salem who judged all her dates harder than her dad ever could. We messaged for 3 weeks before deciding to meet. Our conversations were easy. Not entirely effortless. I still rewrote every message 3 times, but they flowed. She was patient with my awkwardness, and when I told her I didn't go on many dates, she said, "That's okay. I'm not many people's first date either. Just their favorite." We made plans to meet for dinner on a Friday night at a Thai restaurant she liked downtown. I was terrified in a way that felt physical, heart pounding, stomach fluttering, palms sweating. I didn't want to screw it up. I wanted to show up calm, collected, and charming. So I did something incredibly stupid. I took kratom. For those unfamiliar, kratom is a plant-based supplement used in some places to manage pain and anxiety. It comes from Southeast Asia, and depending on the strain and dosage, it can function like a stimulant or a sedative. I'd heard about it from a guy at work who swore it helped him with social anxiety. "Take a little," he said, "and it's like all your nerves go quiet, but you're still alert. Just don't take too much." I bought a small bag of green vein powder from a local smoke shop and mixed 2 teaspoons into a smoothie around 5 p.m. I'd read that the onset was about 30 to 40 minutes. But I didn't feel anything by 6. So I took another teaspoon. Big mistake. By the time I arrived at the restaurant at 6:45 p.m., I felt like I was floating just slightly outside of my body. My vision had a soft blur around the edges, like the world had been gently airbrushed. My tongue felt thick in my mouth, but my anxiety had receded to a dull background buzz. I thought at first that maybe I had nailed it, found the perfect formula to be a normal person. Amelia arrived right on time. She wore a green cardigan and black jeans, her curly auburn hair pulled up in a loose bun, a few strands framing her face. She smiled when she saw me, and I somehow remembered to stand up and greet her like a human being. "Hey," she said. "You made it." "Yeah," I replied, trying not to slur. "Wouldn't miss it." We sat down and ordered drinks, Thai iced tea for her, water for me. I was determined not to mix anything else into my already risky cocktail of herbal supplements and nerves. At first, things went well. I asked her about her job, and she told me a story about a cat that had escaped mid-procedure and climbed the curtains in the exam room. I laughed at the right places. I even told a story of my own, about the time I locked myself in my own garage by accident because I'd forgotten the door needed a key from the inside. But halfway through the appetizer, vegetable spring rolls, I started to feel wrong. It began as a queasiness deep in my gut, like a low tide pulling back. Then came the cold sweat. My skin felt clammy, and I could feel moisture gathering under my arms and behind my knees. My heart rate, which had been steady, suddenly kicked up like an engine revving too fast. Amelia was in the middle of a sentence when I interrupted her. "I'm really sorry," I said, standing too quickly. "I need to use the restroom." She looked concerned but nodded. "Of course." I walked, nose staggered, toward the back of the restaurant, gripping the wall for balance. The hallway to the bathroom stretched longer than it should have, and by the time I reached the door, I was fighting the urge to vomit all over the tile floor. I barely made it into the stall before everything came up. It was violent. My body convulsed with a force I didn't know it had. I vomited once, then twice, then again, until it felt like my stomach was trying to turn itself inside out. I clutched the toilet like a life preserver, gasping, sweating, and trembling. At some point, a knock came on the door. "Sir? Are you all right?" It was a server, his voice cautious. I tried to respond, but only managed to groan. Another wave hit me, and I vomited again, dry heaving this time. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slide sideways, cheek pressed against the grimy tile floor. That's where they found me. I came to with the paramedics kneeling beside me, their voices muffled and distant, like they were speaking through water. One of them shined a light in my eyes. Another asked me my name. I mumbled something. I don't remember what. They loaded me onto a stretcher in the back hallway. I caught a glimpse of Amelia standing near the kitchen, a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with concern, and maybe something else. Pity maybe, or horror. At the hospital, they ran tests. I explained, haltingly, what I had taken. The nurse gave me a look that hovered between judgment and sympathy. "You're lucky," she said. "That stuff's not regulated. People think it's safe because it's sold in stores." "I just wanted to calm down," I whispered. She didn't respond. I was discharged 5 hours later with fluids in my veins and a pamphlet about supplement toxicity in my hands. My phone had blown up with texts from Amelia. "Hey, are you okay? They said you passed out. Should I call someone for you? You don't have to explain, but I'm worried. I didn't reply until the next day. I'm really sorry. I took something I shouldn't have. I didn't mean for the night to go like that. She replied within minutes. You don't owe me an apology. I'm just glad you're all right. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. That was the last message we exchanged. We never went on a second date, but something shifted in me after that night. Not just the embarrassment, though there was plenty of that, but the realization that I didn't need to drug myself into being someone I wasn't. I had made a fool of myself trying to be normal, trying to perform confidence like it was a role in a school play. I started going to therapy that fall. I told my therapist about the kratom incident, expecting him to laugh or shake his head. Instead, he nodded slowly and said, "You were trying to feel safe in the only way you knew how." That stuck with me. I've always been a night owl. Something about the silence after 1 a.m. makes the world feel smaller, like everything has slowed down enough to make sense. That's probably why I was on an app called Nightlight at 2:17 in the morning, half awake and half curious. I lived in a modest studio apartment in Madison, Wisconsin, top floor of an aging brick walk-up on Monroe Street. The place had a slanted ceiling, a leaky kitchen faucet, and a radiator that hissed like an angry cat, but rent was cheap, and it was mine. I'd just turned 28, and after a string of dating failures that ranged from forgettable to mildly traumatic, I wasn't looking for anything serious. But I also wasn't looking for what I got. His name was Miles. I remember the first message he sent me. It was short, direct, and oddly formal. You seem like someone who doesn't waste time. Want to meet up tonight? I almost ignored it. Usually I'd flag a message like that as a red flag, too forward, too vague. But his profile intrigued me. He was 31, a paramedic, originally from Oregon. No shirtless gym selfies, no weird group photos. Just a few dimly lit pictures of him in various places. Holding a coffee in a snow-covered field, standing at the edge of a dock, reading a book I had actually read. His smile was lopsided but kind. I replied, "Tonight? You mean now?" He answered within seconds. "Yeah, why not?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. I should have said no. I knew better. But it was a Wednesday, I had the next day off, and I was feeling impulsive, lonely if I'm being honest. So I said yes. We agreed he'd come over. I sent him my address, and he said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I looked around my apartment in mild panic. Dishes in the sink. Laundry on the floor. I shoved everything into one corner, brushed my teeth again, and put on a hoodie over my tank top. By the time I heard the knock on my door, I was already regretting it. I opened it carefully. He stood there, taller than I expected, wearing a dark gray coat and black jeans. His hair was tousled in a way that looked accidental, but probably wasn't. He had a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. "Miles?" I asked. "Yep," he said, smiling softly. "Sophie?" "Yeah." We stood there awkwardly for a moment before I stepped aside and let him in. As he walked past me, I caught the scent of antiseptic and mint. Clean but clinical. My apartment was dimly lit, just a floor lamp by the couch and some fairy lights strung along the window. He looked around, took it in, and said, "Cozy." "Thanks," I replied. "Want some tea or water or something?" "Water's fine." I handed him a glass and sat down on the edge of the couch. He sat beside me, not too close, not too far. We made small talk for a while. He told me a bit about his job, long shifts, emotional burnout, the weird camaraderie of ambulance teams. I told him about my work as a freelance copywriter, how I sometimes stayed up all night editing articles for clients in other time zones. Conversation flowed easily, and I started to relax. There was something calm about him, almost too calm. Still, he seemed gentle and respectful, no overt flirtation, no leering glances. Just quiet attentiveness. Eventually, he asked, "Mind if I take my shoes off?" "Go ahead." He slipped them off and pulled his legs up onto the couch. "Mind if I crash here for a few hours?" "I've been up since yesterday morning." I blinked. "You mean sleep here?" "Just a nap," he said. "I've got a shift at 7. I can be out by 6:30. I hesitated. It was 3:45 a.m. Letting a man I barely knew fall asleep in my apartment felt like the kind of decision you regret in the morning. But he looked exhausted. His head leaned back against the couch, eyes half-lidded. "Okay," I said slowly. "But couch only." He nodded, appreciative. "Of course." I handed him a throw blanket and a pillow. He thanked me, stretched out, and within minutes was asleep. I stayed up, sitting in the armchair across the room, pretending to scroll through my phone but mostly watching him. His breathing was steady. His face looked peaceful. I tried to tell myself it was fine. He was just a tired guy. I was being hospitable. Around 4:30, I finally went to bed, leaving the door to my bedroom cracked open just in case. When I woke up at 7:15, the apartment was silent. I got up and walked into the living room. The couch was empty. The blanket and pillow were folded neatly. The glass he drank from was rinsed and drying in the sink. And Miles was gone. No text. No note. No message on the app. At first, I was relieved. Nothing bad had happened. He didn't steal anything. He didn't cross any boundaries. But then I started to feel unsettled. Why ask to sleep if he was just going to leave? I opened the app and checked our chat. His profile was gone. Deleted. Like he'd never existed. I spent the whole day running scenarios in my head. Maybe he just didn't want to be contacted. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was trying to ghost me before anything even started. Still, something didn't sit right. That night, I told my friend Jenna about the encounter over the phone. She was quiet for a beat and then said, "That's creepy." "I know," I said. "But nothing happened." He was polite. Weirdly polite. "Exactly," she said. "Too polite. It's like he was trying to cover something." I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the way he had looked around my apartment, how he had asked to sleep there so casually, like it wasn't a big deal. Like he'd done it before. A week went by. I tried to put it out of my mind. Then, one evening, while browsing Reddit, I came across a thread titled, "Weirdest Experience Hosting a First Date." Curious, I scrolled through. One post caught my eye. A woman in Milwaukee described a man she met on a dating app. Said he came over late at night, asked to nap on her couch, then disappeared before morning. No message. No profile. Just gone. She included a photo. It was Miles. Same coat. Same bag. Same lopsided smile. I felt my stomach twist. I messaged her privately. She replied within an hour. We compared notes. Everything matched: his job, his mannerisms, his timing. She said she'd heard from another woman in Chicago with the exact same story. 3 women. 3 cities. All within the same 2-month window. I posted a warning in a local Facebook group for women, describing what had happened. Within 48 hours, 5 more women commented, each with eerily similar experiences. Some had let him crash. Some hadn't. A few said their things were slightly out of place the next morning. Drawers open, books pulled off shelves, phone chargers missing. No one knew his real name. He never left a number. Always late-night meetups. Always gone before sunrise. We started compiling information, trying to track him down. One woman said she had taken a photo of his ID when he visited her, said it looked slightly off, like a fake. Another matched his image to a photo on a local news article from 2 years earlier. It was a story about a man found trespassing in a hospital staff lounge, claiming to be a paramedic. He had no credentials. No ID. Said he was just tired and trying to rest. He was never charged. Just escorted out. The resemblance was undeniable. I printed the article and pinned it to the bulletin board in my hallway. I stared at it every morning for weeks. Eventually, the messages stopped. None of us had any more leads. We assumed he moved on to another city. I never saw him again, but I never forgot. I wasn't new to dating apps, but I was definitely growing tired of them. After dozens of awkward conversations and a few forgettable meetups, I had developed a kind of second sense for when something felt off. Still, I was willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, at least until they gave me a concrete reason not to. This story takes place in the summer of 2018, in Charleston, South Carolina. I had recently moved there to start a new job as a junior editor at a small publishing firm. It was hot, humid, and buzzing with tourists, and I was trying to settle into my new routine. Between unpacking boxes and learning the bus routes, I downloaded an app called Pulse, a dating app popular in the Southeast. It had a friendlier interface than most, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to try. That's where I matched with a guy named Tyler. Tyler's profile didn't scream anything alarming. He looked like an average guy in his late 20s, messy brown hair, a shy smile, and a few photos with a German shepherd. His bio said he liked ska music, hiking, and deep conversations over cheap pizza. We messaged for a few days, and he seemed normal. Not particularly witty or charismatic, but polite and responsive. He mentioned that he lived in Mount Pleasant, just outside the city, and didn't drive much because of a suspended license. That should have been a red flag, but I let it slide. He asked me to meet him halfway at a pizza place called Tony's Slice House. I agreed. It was about a 30-minute walk for me, and I figured it would be an easy public first date. But on the day we were supposed to meet, he texted me saying it was too far for him to walk to the restaurant and asked if I could come closer to his neighborhood instead. I hesitated. I didn't love the idea of changing the plan last minute, especially when it was clearly his issue, not mine. But I didn't want to be inflexible. I agreed, and we settled on meeting at a small park near his place. When I arrived, I saw him leaning against a bench, scrolling on his phone. Right away, I noticed several things. First, he looked nothing like his photos. Not in a he aged a little kind of way, but in a these pictures must be at least 5 years old kind of way. His hair was greasy, slicked back unevenly, and his face was more sunken than I remembered. His shirt had holes around the collar and sleeves. He wore sandals with no socks, and his toenails were noticeable. Still, I approached him, gave a quick side hug, and tried to push past my initial discomfort. I suggested we sit down and talk, maybe go for a walk through the park. He shook his head. "We're not getting pizza," he said. "Let's just chill here." It wasn't exactly romantic, but I nodded. We found a bench near the lake and sat down. He immediately started talking about a weed strain he had just picked up and how he'd smoked earlier that day. I noticed his teeth were stained dark brown around the gums, likely from tobacco or chewing dip, and the smell of smoke clung to his clothes. Trying to steer the conversation toward something more neutral, I asked about his dog. He barely responded, then pulled out his phone and started texting someone. I sat there awkwardly, watching ducks glide across the water, while he said nothing for a full minute. Then out of nowhere, he put his phone down, turned to me and said, "You're cute. You're like, really cute. I like innocent girls." I gave him a polite smile and said thank you, unsure how to respond. He leaned in suddenly and whispered, "You're such a good baby girl." Before I could process what he'd just said, he grabbed my face with one hand, leaned closer, and licked me. Like actually licked my face. From the bottom of my chin to the top of my cheekbone. I froze. "Did you just lick me?" I asked, pulling away and wiping my cheek with my sleeve. He grinned like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, you smell good." I stared at him, stunned. "Don't do that again." He shrugged and laughed. "You're funny." I was done. I stood up and pretended to check my phone. "Actually, I just got a message from my roommate. She needs me back at the apartment ASAP. Sorry, I've got to go." He looked disappointed. "What? Already? We just got here." "Yeah," I said firmly. "Emergency." He stood up too, walking beside me as I headed toward the exit. "Come back to my place. We can smoke a bowl, chill out. I've got a couch and everything." "I'm good," I said quickly. "Don't be like that," he replied. "Just one bowl. You'll like it." I stopped walking, turned to face him and said, "I said no. Please don't follow me." He held up his hands. All right. Chill." I walked away without looking back. My pace quickened as I turned onto the main road, and I didn't slow down until I was several blocks away. I didn't even wait to get home to block his number and report his profile. The app had a feature where you could flag inappropriate behavior, and I used it without hesitation. Later that night, I told my roommate about what happened, and she sat in stunned silence for a full minute before saying, "He licked you? Like with his tongue?" "Yep," I said. "Like a dog." After that, I stopped using dating apps for a while. The whole experience had shaken me, not just because of the lick, but because I'd ignored so many signs along the way. The last-minute change, the outdated photos, the visible signs of neglect. I had allowed politeness to override my instincts. It made me think about how often women are conditioned to be agreeable, to give people chances, to not overreact. But if I had trusted my gut from the beginning, I could have saved myself from that entire encounter. Months later, I saw Tyler again. I was walking through a farmer's market downtown with a friend, and there he was, sitting on a bench near the entrance, smoking and scrolling on his phone. He looked up and saw me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled. I didn't smile back. I just turned and walked the other way. Online dating had never really been my thing. I was 25, living in Burlington, Vermont, and up until that point, most of my relationships had been through mutual friends, college parties, or just the old-fashioned way, meeting someone at a bookstore or coffee shop. But after a particularly rough breakup the year before, I decided to take a break from dating entirely. That break lasted 4 months. Eventually, the loneliness crept in. My friends were getting engaged, moving in with their partners, or planning weddings. I started to feel like the odd one out. So after some half-hearted encouragement from a coworker, I gave in and made an account on a dating site called TrueSpark. It was marketed as a more serious dating platform, with lengthy profiles and filtered matches. I figured if I was going to try online dating, I might as well go for the version that didn't involve endless swiping. The sign-up process was long. I answered dozens of personality questions, wrote a bio, listed my hobbies, and described my ideal partner. There was even a prompt asking you to describe your emotional availability on a scale of 1 to 10. I hesitated and put 6. I chose not to upload a profile photo. I liked the idea of being matched based on compatibility first, not appearance. I was told that if I didn't post a photo, I would only be shown to other users who also opted out of sharing pictures. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for eye candy. I just wanted something real. The first 2 weeks were rough. I received over a dozen match suggestions, and most of them were odd. One guy wrote that he only dated women who never wore makeup. Another said he lived with his mom and collected taxidermy. One profile was just a list of conspiracy theories and things the government won't tell you. I was about to delete my account when I got matched with someone named Logan. His profile stood out immediately. He was 28, lived in Montpelier, and described himself as a curious soul who loves jazz music, red wine, and long conversations that stretch into the early morning. He had also uploaded a photo, which was unusual since I hadn't posted one. I didn't know how that worked, but his profile seemed too good to ignore. Logan's photo showed a man with short dark hair, a clean-shaven face, and a relaxed smile. He wore a navy pea coat and stood in front of a brick building, probably a cafe or bookstore. He looked kind and intelligent. I was intrigued. We messaged back and forth for a few days. His writing style was thoughtful, and he asked questions about things beyond surface level. We talked about our favorite books, what we were like in high school, and whether we believed in soulmates. It was refreshing. By the 4th day, he suggested we meet in person. He proposed a wine bar in downtown Burlington, 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. I agreed. Since he didn't know what I looked like, I told him I'd be carrying something red, a small handbag I had, and he said he'd wear a red necktie. It felt like a cute, old-school way to identify each other, like something out of a movie. I arrived at the bar around 7:45 p.m. It was a cozy, dimly lit spot with brick walls, flickering candles on the tables, and soft jazz playing in the background. I ordered a glass of red wine and found a small table near the back corner, my red bag resting on my lap. As I waited, a few men approached me. One tried to chat me up and offered to buy me a drink. I politely declined and kept glancing at the door, looking for someone in a red tie. But no one came. By 8:30, I had finished my wine and was beginning to feel embarrassed and frustrated. I texted Logan, but there was no response. I waited another 15 minutes and then decided to leave. I walked out onto the sidewalk, my heels clicking against the pavement. The side streets were quiet, and I headed toward my car, which I'd parked a few blocks away. As I turned the corner into a narrow side street, a car drove slowly past me and parked directly behind mine. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when I reached my car and pulled out my keys, the other car's door opened. A man stepped out. He was taller than I expected, probably 6 feet, and wore a wrinkled dress shirt, slacks, and a red tie. My stomach dropped. "You must be Susie," he said, his voice gravelly. "Sorry I'm late. I'm Logan." I froze. He looked nothing like the photo. His hair was long, greasy, and blonde. His face was deeply lined, and he looked to be in his late 40s, maybe even early 50s. His shirt was stained, and his hands were trembling slightly. "I was waiting for you," I said quietly, trying to stay calm. "You never showed." "Got held up," he said casually. "But I figured we could still hang out. Better late than never, right?" I took a step back, trying to keep distance between us. I was just heading home. He took a step toward me. "I came all the way here," he said. "Let's not waste the night. Come on, I'll drive." He gestured toward his car. That's when I saw it. In his right hand, partially hidden under his coat, was a small knife. My heart raced. My mind scrambled for a plan. As he spoke, I slowly reached into my red handbag. My fingers wrapped around the small canister of pepper spray I always carried. I never thought I'd need it, but my dad had insisted on it when I moved out. "I want you to get in the car now," he said, his voice lower. I didn't answer. I stepped to the left, just enough to give myself space. Then I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it straight at his face. The hiss of the spray was sharp and sudden. Logan screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his eyes. Blinded, he stumbled backward, cursing and flailing. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, sprinting down the street toward the main road. I screamed for help as loud as I could. Within seconds, a man in a security uniform came running from the direction of the wine bar. "What happened?" he asked. I pointed behind me, gasping for breath. "There's a man. He tried to kidnap me. He had a knife." The security guard grabbed his phone and called the police. Moments later, blue and red lights lit up the street. Logan was still on the ground, groaning, eyes swollen shut. The officers handcuffed him and retrieved the knife. I gave a full statement at the police station that night. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. They told me the man's real name was not Logan. He had a criminal record spanning several states, mostly for fraud and harassment, but also for attempting to impersonate others online. The photo on his dating profile wasn't him. It was stolen from someone else's social media. I went home that night shaken, but incredibly grateful. It took weeks before I felt comfortable going out alone again. I deleted my profile on TrueSpark and never used that site again. I also stopped talking to the coworker who initially convinced me to try it. She was the one who had matched with Logan first, but passed his information along to me after she lost interest. She claimed she didn't know anything was off, but I couldn't bring myself to trust her after that. I didn't date anyone for a long time after. The experience had rattled me deeply. I had always assumed I was cautious, smart about who I met. But this man had slipped through the cracks, and I had almost paid a terrible price for it. Now, years later, I still carry that pepper spray. I still park close to entrances and avoid side streets at night. Some people might call it paranoia. I call it survival. It was the spring of 2011, and I had just started a new job at a manufacturing plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The work was tough and the hours were long, 3 p.m. to nearly midnight most days, but it paid well, and I was trying to save up to move out of my parents' place. I didn't have much of a social life at the time. Most of my friends had either moved away or were busy settling into their careers or getting married. I was stuck somewhere in between, not sure what I wanted, but knowing I didn't want to be alone. After weeks of pestering from a coworker, I finally downloaded a dating app called Flame. It was a local app, mostly popular in the Midwest. I wasn't expecting much, but I figured it couldn't hurt to put myself out there. I made a profile, just a few pictures from high school and a short bio about liking classic rock and fishing. Within a few days, I started chatting with a girl named Haley. Haley was gorgeous. Not in the obvious Instagram influencer kind of way, but in a natural, earthy sense. She had dark brown curls that fell past her shoulders, a dimpled smile, and a way of typing that felt warm and personal. We exchanged messages daily, about music, life, food, and our mutual dislike of corporate America. She was 23, just a year older than me, and worked part-time at a bookstore while finishing her degree in psychology. Our chats were light-hearted at first, but they gradually became more thoughtful. She told me about her love for late-night walks, and how she often sat by Lake Michigan to clear her head. I admitted I hadn't done anything spontaneous in a while. After a couple of weeks of texting, we decided to meet. Since I worked late, we agreed to hang out after my shift on a Friday night. Haley was okay with it being late. She said she liked quiet places, and the park at night would be our little secret spot. I was nervous but excited. I hadn't been on a real date in over a year, and this one felt different. There was something familiar about her, something I couldn't quite place. Her last name rang a faint bell, and I wondered if we had mutual friends or had crossed paths in high school. We agreed to meet at Tyler Park by the lake. It was a quiet, open space with a few benches, a small dock, and a walking trail that curved around the shoreline. I got off work at 9:45 p.m., went home to shower and change, and drove to the park. I arrived at around 10:40 p.m. Haley was already there, sitting on a bench near the water, dressed in a denim jacket and leggings, her hair down and catching the breeze. She stood and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you made it," she said, her voice even softer in person. "Yeah," I replied, grinning. "Wasn't gonna miss this." We sat down and talked for a while. The moonlight shimmered on the lake, and the scent of wet grass filled the air. We lit a joint she had brought, and passed it between us, laughing quietly at our own stories. She told me about her classes, her weird regulars at the bookstore, and how she sometimes wrote poetry but never shared it. I told her about work, how I hated the night shift, and how I once got caught sleeping in the break room. As the high settled in, I leaned back, staring at the stars. Everything felt peaceful, surreal even. Then out of nowhere, Haley leaned forward, grabbed her stomach, and made a strange noise, a gurgled hiccup that turned into a retch. She leaned over and vomited violently onto the grass beside the bench. I sat up straight, shocked. "Whoa, are you okay?" She gagged again, another wave of vomit splashing onto the ground. I froze for a second, then awkwardly reached out and patted her back, just like my mom used to do when I was sick as a kid. I didn't know what else to do. She continued throwing up for several minutes, her face pale and sweaty. When she finally stopped, she wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her jacket and mumbled, "Sorry. I didn't think it would hit me that hard." I assumed she meant the weed. But then she added something that completely threw me off. "I've been drinking since noon," she said, laughing softly. "Didn't think I'd puke in front of you, though." It hit me then. She'd been drunk before I even got there. Everything, the flushed cheeks, the slightly slurred speech, the way she swayed a little when she stood up, it all made sense now. My heart sank. I had been so excited for this date, so ready to believe it might lead somewhere, that I hadn't picked up on any of the signs. I thought we were vibing, connecting on a real level. But now, sitting on a park bench next to a girl who could barely stay upright, I realized I didn't know her at all. She leaned against my shoulder and sighed. "You're really sweet," she murmured. "Most guys would have left by now." I didn't respond. I just kept staring at the lake, feeling a mix of disappointment and discomfort. After a few minutes of silence, I pulled out my phone and ordered her an Uber. She didn't argue. When the car pulled up, she tried to get me to ride with her. "Come on," she pleaded, grabbing my arm. "Just come back with me. We can chill more." "I can't," I said firmly. "I have to work early tomorrow." She pouted, clearly unhappy, but I stayed firm. The driver looked uncomfortable, probably unsure whether to intervene. After a brief standoff, Haley finally slumped into the back seat. As I closed the door behind her, she started crying. I watched the car pull away, my stomach churning. I walked back to my car in silence, trying to process what had just happened. I kept thinking about all the messages we'd exchanged, how genuine she seemed, how excited I was to meet her. And now, all I could think about was the smell of vomit and the realization that she hadn't come to the park to get to know me. She had come because she was already messed up, and maybe just needed someone to keep her company. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a long time. I didn't go inside right away. I just stared at the dashboard, thinking. I never heard from Haley again. I didn't block her, but she didn't reach out. Part of me wonders if she even remembered the night, or if it just blended into whatever haze she'd been living in. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I had fallen for her, of course not, but because it felt like I had been used. Not for money or favors, but for emotional cover. Like she needed someone to help her feel normal for a couple of hours, and I just happened to be the guy who answered the texts. It made me wary of dating apps after that. I didn't delete Flame right away, but I stopped checking it. I focused on work, saved my money, and eventually moved to Milwaukee. I met someone more stable years later, a teacher named Brenna, and we've been together ever since. It was late autumn in 2007, and the streets of downtown Cleveland were lined with golden leaves. The air was crisp, sharp enough to make you pull your coat a little tighter, but still pleasant enough to enjoy a night out. I had just turned 27 and was living alone for the first time in a small apartment near Ohio City. I had a decent job as a systems analyst, a small but close circle of friends, and a growing desire to meet someone special, or at least someone halfway normal. Dating apps were still relatively new back then. Tinder hadn't even been invented, but there were a few early platforms and some sketchy websites. I wasn't much of a tech guy in my personal life, but after a few nudges from co-workers, I decided to try an app called Matchmate. It was a basic swipe-and-chat setup, and after a few awkward exchanges that led nowhere, I matched with someone named Samantha. Samantha's profile was simple but clever. She had listed her favorite books, The Bell Jar, The Great Gatsby, her favorite food, sushi, and her dream vacation, Lisbon. Her profile picture was blurry but intriguing, a tall woman with long, wavy blonde hair, wearing sunglasses and a red scarf. She looked like the kind of person who drank black coffee and wore long coats in the rain. I was hooked almost immediately. We started chatting on a Tuesday night. Her messages were quick and witty. She joked about how difficult it was to find someone who knew the difference between your, and and I laughed a little too hard at her sarcasm. She told me her name was Samantha, that she was 29 and worked in marketing. I told her my name was Eric, and that I was 27 and worked in IT. She called me a baby, and said she had a thing for younger men. I called her a cougar, and she typed back, "rawr." By Thursday, she asked if I wanted to meet. I was surprised by how forward she was, but I appreciated her initiative. I asked, where and when, and she replied with a reservation, 8:30 p.m., Saturday night, at a restaurant called Veluto's in downtown Cleveland. "It's already booked under your name," she said. "Don't be late." That should have been the first warning sign. Who makes a reservation under the other person's name, without even confirming their availability? But I was flattered and curious, so I agreed. I sent her a few more messages after that, confirming the plan and trying to chat more. She didn't reply. Not once. I chalked it up to her being busy, or maybe just playing hard to get. Saturday night came, and I found myself pacing nervously outside Veluto's. It was a dimly lit Italian place tucked between a bakery and a vintage record store. I wore a navy button-down and black slacks, trying to look casual but put together. My hands were cold, and I kept checking my phone even though I hadn't received a single message since Thursday. Inside, the hostess greeted me with a smile. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yeah," I said. "Should be under Eric." She scanned the list and nodded. "Right this way." She led me to a corner table near the back. It was quiet, away from the main dining area, and dimly lit by a single hanging lamp. I sat down, ordered a drink to calm my nerves, and waited. By 8:45, I was beginning to feel the weight of embarrassment. I had been stood up before, but something about this felt worse. Maybe because I had actually been looking forward to it. I kept glancing at the door, hoping someone resembling Samantha's blurry profile photo would walk through. Then I saw her. Tall, blonde, and stunning. She stepped into the restaurant alongside a waiter, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Her dress was tight-fitting, made from some silky material that shimmered slightly under the dim lights. Her hair flowed past her shoulders, and her confident stride made her look like she didn't belong in Cleveland, let alone this restaurant. I began to stand, adrenaline kicking in. But then the waiter passed by my table, and so did she. She glanced at me briefly, gave a polite smile, and kept walking. I turned in my seat, watching as she joined a table in the far corner. Sitting opposite her was a heavy-set, bald man, wearing a loud Hawaiian shirt and expensive-looking watch. She leaned in, smiling, and began to talk to him like they were old friends, or maybe something more. I slumped back into my seat and tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Was that Samantha? Had she double-booked her night? Or was I being paranoid? That's when another voice interrupted me. "Hi there. You must be Eric." I turned back toward my table and saw an older woman standing next to the waiter. She was short, maybe 5'3", with reddish ginger hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her face was heavily freckled, and she wore no makeup. Her outfit was a knitted sweater over a patterned blouse and slacks that looked like they came from a department store clearance rack. "I'm Samantha," she said, smiling. "Or, well, my name's actually Denise. But Samantha's my online name. You were right, by the way. I'm definitely a cougar tonight." She laughed at her own joke and sat down before I could respond. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. She picked up the menu and said, "I hope they have lobster. I've been craving it all week." I tried to maintain composure. I told myself maybe she had a great personality. Maybe this could still be salvaged. But the truth was I felt betrayed. She had misled me. The photos, the name, even the age, everything had been a lie. Still I stayed. Out of politeness, out of shock, and maybe out of curiosity. We ordered food, no lobster, just pasta, and tried to make conversation. She told me she worked part-time at a craft store and lived with her sister in Parma. She had been through 2 divorces and had 3 grown children. She said she used the name Samantha online because it made her feel young again. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're sweet, Eric," she said. "Not many men your age would give an older woman like me a chance." I didn't have the heart to correct her. The rest of the night passed in awkward silence, punctuated by her stories about her cats, her favorite TV shows, and her most recent dental surgery. I nodded along, trying to be kind, while my mind screamed at me to leave. After dinner, she asked if I wanted to grab a drink at a nearby bar. I told her I had an early meeting the next morning. She looked disappointed, but didn't argue. We walked to the valet stand, and she hugged me tightly before climbing into a cab. "You're a good guy, Eric," she said. "I hope we can do this again." I nodded, smiled, and watched her drive away. I stood on the sidewalk for a few moments, unsure of what had just happened. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was more bewildered than anything. I had gone out expecting a date with a woman I barely knew, and ended up sharing dinner with someone who had built an entire persona just to get that seat across from me. The experience shook me more than I expected. I didn't log back into Matchmate for weeks. When I finally did, I saw that Denise, Samantha, had unmatched me. Maybe she sensed that it hadn't gone well. Or maybe she felt guilty. Either way, I never heard from her again. I told the story to a few friends, who laughed and called it a classic catfishing tale. But for me, it was something deeper. It was a glimpse into how lonely people can be, and how far they'll go to feel seen, even if it means pretending to be someone else. When I think back to my early 20s, I sometimes reflect on how naive I was. I was living in Albany, New York, fresh out of college, working my first full-time job as a junior designer for an ad agency. Life was unpredictable and exciting, and I was eager to meet new people. This particular story is one that I don't usually tell unless someone insists on hearing the worst date I've ever had. It's long, strange, and left me with a lesson I wouldn't fully grasp until years later. It was the summer of 2003, a hot and humid time in upstate New York. I had met a woman named Tara through a mutual friend who worked in the HR department of my office. She was described as quirky but sweet, and I was told she had a cute laugh and a small dog she adored. I had just ended a short-lived relationship, so I figured why not? Our first few phone conversations were light and pleasant. She had a soothing voice and often giggled at my jokes, even the bad ones. We arranged a dinner date for the following Saturday. Tara lived in a modest apartment complex just off Lark Street, above a small cafe that smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. I arrived around 6:30 p.m., parked my car in front of the deli next door, and walked up the steps leading to her unit. The door was already open when I got there, which was the first red flag I chose to ignore. Her apartment door stood slightly ajar, and I could hear the scuffle of tiny paws echoing through the hallway. A little brown dog, possibly a miniature pinscher or a Chihuahua mix, darted past me, its leash trailing behind like a ribbon. I instinctively bent down and scooped the little dog up, gently cradling it in my arms. Just then, Tara's voice called out from inside the apartment. "Oh, you must be my date. How are you?" She emerged from the doorway with a frazzled expression, her hair tied in a messy ponytail and her tank top slightly stained. She smiled briefly, then added, "Can you take Charlie out? He hasn't had his walk yet, and I need a minute to get ready." Caught off guard, I hesitated. Was this some kind of test? A quirky icebreaker? Either way, I nodded politely and took Charlie outside. As I walked him down the street, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been cast in a role I hadn't prepared for. I was supposed to be her date, yet here I was, walking her dog before even saying hello properly. The dog, at least, was cute and well-behaved. He sniffed around, did his business near a lamppost, and wagged his tail as we made our way back to the building. Back upstairs, Tara was still scrambling around. Her hair was now brushed, but she seemed even more frantic. She thanked me for walking Charlie and quickly locked the door behind her, only to realize she had forgotten her phone and purse. She unlocked the door, dashed inside, and then locked it again after retrieving her things. We finally started walking to my car, but the entire time, she kept muttering under her breath about how chaotic her day had been. As we approached my car, she stopped abruptly and said, "You know what? I'm feeling really anxious. I don't think I can go out to dinner tonight. Can we just go to your place and chill for a bit?" I blinked. Was this really happening? I hesitated. I didn't want to be rude or dismissive, but something about this already felt off. Sure, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. We can do that if it makes you feel better. My apartment was about 20 minutes away in the Pine Hills neighborhood. I lived with my college buddy, Drew, who was thankfully out of town visiting family that weekend. The drive was quiet, punctuated only by Tara talking about her ex-husband, her landlord, and how she was going through a transformative period. I didn't say much. I just nodded and occasionally threw in a wow, or that sounds rough. In my mind, I was replaying the events of the evening so far. I had barely said 5 words before becoming a dog walker, a listener, and now, a host. I didn't know what this woman wanted, but it didn't feel like a date anymore. Still, I was young and curious, and part of me wanted to see where this would go. Back at my place, Tara immediately made herself at home. She placed her purse on the coffee table, kicked off her sandals, and plopped down on the couch like she had done it 100 times before. She let out a long sigh, the type that sounded like she'd been holding her breath all day. I turned on the TV and asked if she wanted something to drink. She shook her head and pulled her knees up to her chest. "This week has been hell," she began, her voice cracking just slightly. "I found out my ex is getting remarried. My landlord is kicking me out because his niece needs a place to stay. And my dog is sick. I had to take him to the vet twice this week." I listened sympathetically, but deep down I felt uneasy. Her eyes were distant, and while she spoke with a sarcastic laugh, her story was anything but funny. She talked about her ex being a successful software engineer who used to pay for everything. According to her, she had sacrificed her own career to support him emotionally, and now he had moved on, leaving her with nothing. About 15 minutes into our conversation, her phone rang. Tara jumped up to answer it and walked into the hallway. Her voice became hushed and tense, and although I couldn't hear the entire conversation, bits and pieces floated into the living room. "What do you mean I need to be out by Monday?" she asked, raising her voice slightly. "I thought we agreed on the 15th. "No, I don't have anywhere else to go right now." When she returned, her expression was strained. "That was my landlord," she said. "He's being a total jerk. I might be homeless next week." She looked at me with wide eyes, and I knew what was coming next. She didn't say the words outright, but her expression said it all. "Help me. Offer to let me stay here." I didn't take the bait. I nodded empathetically, but didn't open that door. The atmosphere had shifted. I no longer felt like a guest on a date. I felt like a pawn in someone else's crisis. She continued talking, this time about how her last boyfriend had a perfect life, and how she missed the stability. The way she described him, it sounded like she had treated him as a lifeline rather than a partner. That's when I realized she might be doing the same thing to me. I decided I needed to end this. I told her my roommate would be back in half an hour and that we had plans. I also offered, falsely, to help her move, and even said I'd send her some money to help her get back on her feet. It wasn't the truth, but it was the only way I could get her to leave without confrontation. She agreed reluctantly, and I guided her down the stairs, back to my car. On the drive back to her apartment, she kept talking about how hard her life had been lately, and how she just needed someone who cared. I didn't say much. I was counting the minutes until I could drop her off. When we arrived outside her building, she turned to me and asked, "Do you want to come in? I could really use help packing some stuff for the move." I almost laughed out loud. "I wish I could, but my roommate needs me back." "He doesn't have a key," I replied quickly. She nodded, disappointed. "Okay, but you'll text me, right?" "Of course," I lied. She got out, closed the door, and disappeared inside. I waited until she was out of sight before driving off. The moment I turned the corner, I exhaled deeply, a wave of relief washing over me. When I got home, Drew was actually there. He had come back early and was eating leftover pizza in the kitchen. I told him the whole story, from the open door to the landlord phone call to the attempted guilt trip. He stared at me in disbelief. "You dodged a bullet," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "I think I did." I never contacted Tara again. She messaged me a few times over the next week, but I didn't respond. Eventually, the messages stopped,